Welcome to the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Chapman, and I just want to say for those of you listening for the first time, thank you for being here, and I hope that you check out other episodes and subscribe so you never miss another one, and consider telling a friend or two. If you've been a long-time listener, thank you for returning. I want to continue making these episodes helpful. So if there's something that you want to hear more about, learn more about, definitely send me a message so I know what you want to learn about next. So today I am so excited to introduce you to our guest, Diane Yoder. Diane is a nutritional therapy practitioner and a certified health coach, and she specializes in mineral balancing, brain health, and detoxification. She works with women and families to overcome challenges like brain fog and fatigue and ADHD symptoms. And she does this through the power of personalized nutrition, which is safe, and it targets detox protocols. She uses specific tools to uncover what's happening inside the body and then designs a safe, natural strategy to restore balance. So from mineral deficiency to heavy metal toxicity, Diane empowers people to take control of their health in a way that feels natural, sustainable, and doable, focusing on improving cognitive health, increasing energy, and supporting long-term vitality. If you've ever felt weighed down by fatigue, struggled with brain fog, or wondered how nutrition and detoxification might play a role in ADHD and mental clarity, you're going to love this conversation. So let's dive in. Diane, I just want to say thank you for being here on the Go Slow to Go Fast podcast. And I'm so excited that you've agreed to sit down with us and just kind of share your background and your insights around your work. But first, do you mind sharing with our listeners and viewers how you're going slow to go fast these days?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. I've been really excited for our talk today. Some ways that I'm going slow to go fast. I was thinking about it as I was preparing this morning. And a couple things. So one is just like really basic, but it's taking like a couple minutes longer to just kind of set an intention of what I want the day to be like, even though it doesn't always go that way. It gives me a good chance to kind of decide before life like happens to me. I left home when I was really young. And it was kind of like survival mode for many years. And so I got into this habit of getting up and your feet hit the floor and it's just like work at school, just going really fast. And I kind of lost like a little bit of, you just kind of are doing the next thing that's necessary. So I've just recently been more like, even a couple minutes seems to go a long way for me in the mornings. It's just like quiet, intention, and then moving forward with that.
Yeah, I think if you can just have a little moment to yourself before you start your day, I've experienced that it just goes smoother for me. And it's not as hectic. And it can be busy and it can be full of meetings and, whatever that day might look like. But I just feel like if you have that minute at the beginning to set your intention, it's going to be such a better experience for you.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you kind of walk us through your background and kind of what led you to get into the work that you do now? Just kind of bring our listeners and viewers up to speed.
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit of my background would be, I grew up with kind of maybe different background than a lot of your audience. So my family was Amish growing up. So as you already probably kind of know about the Amish community, they try to do as much, as naturally as possible. Like they have their own remedies. They do a lot of their own gardening, own food, things like that. There's a lot about my background that I really appreciate, but due to life circumstances, it left I was 19, I think. So I had no experience in the world, so to speak, being that I grew up, the way that we do. And so I started school and, getting into things. But with all that, I hit a point where I was really not able to go anymore. I went through a viral illness that really took my energy and everything. And for a couple of years, everything was just really hard to keep going. So I started kind of looking into ways of helping myself feel better without, like, I did see doctors and things, but nothing was really helping. So I went back to some things that we knew in the community that can help. And I found a naturopath that lives in the community, even though she was not Amish. And she was really incredibly helpful. So a lot of my symptoms would have been brain fog, inability to focus. It was like affecting my job. And I couldn't afford that, And sometimes depression, like just feeling like life is pretty dark at times, but also a lot of anxiety mixed in with it. So through the process, she was really helpful in guiding me back to like the foundation of things. And we found some deficiencies in my body that were really impacting the neurotransmitter function, causing symptoms like ADHD. And then also even some of toxicities from like heavy metals that were really like causing the neurotransmitter activity to be overexcited, inability to focus. But it was a long journey. It was not overnight. It took a lot of time, but it really changed my life. And because of that, I went into training to become a practitioner myself and worked under her mentorship for a couple years. And that's what I do now, is helping other people get their life back if they have lost their energy. And kind of a lot of people that I work with tend to have the similar symptoms that I did, like inability to focus, depression, burnout. And I don't know how that all happened because I don't really advertise that way, but it just kind of is what came to me then as well as I was working.
Right. And it's interesting because you had the first 19 years of your life, you lived a very natural way where you didn't have a lot of that outside influence from pesticides or, chemicals, red dye, like all the things that probably, infiltrate young kids through teen years and their diet.
Wow.
And you still had some of those symptoms
Yeah,
that
I know
we're
that it's
seeing in teenagers.
fascinating. Yeah, like the Amish community, it's not quite as like a lot more conventional foods have filtered in than there used to be. Like even when my parents were kids, that was like very rare to even now have a lot more conveniences than they did. So I would think some of my symptoms started in school. I was actually diagnosed with like inability to focus at a pretty young age, which looking back, there was a lot of like dysfunction in our home relationship wise. And so who knows like how much of that was playing into it, how much of it was nutrition. But then leaving, I didn't realize what processed foods do to us, like not sleeping, like working on like 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night and just going as hard as you can. Your body can't be doing that very long, especially as women. I feel like, especially with cycles and things. So I feel like the background I had was really good as far as nutrition, but yeah, just like going away from living outside of what our body is intended to really impacted me quickly and harshly.
Yeah. 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 And who knows? Everybody's different, but I think it's interesting to hear how you came to realize, what you could take out of your diet and what you could take out of your environment to feel better. So as you worked with this wellness coach and figured out, or all the different medical providers that you worked with, what strategies did you find worked best for you that you think would maybe resonate with the listeners
Sure.
and
I mean, a
viewers?
lot of it was really just coming back to the basics, like getting outside, getting sunshine, fresh air, breath
Mm-hmm.
work, eating nutritious food, not just like going to work and not having a plan and then eating fast food or whatever. Things that I was doing on a regular basis that had just accumulated where the body couldn't keep up. But then too, we discovered, so I did the hair tissue mineral analysis test, and something that really came up was mercury toxicity and toxicity, which is kind of shocking that I have no idea where I would have gotten them from. I talked with my mom later because they were like trying to figure out where I might have like accumulated the mercury from. And she'd had a lot of amalgam fillings as a kid. So those would have been used, I guess, more back in the day than they even do now. I think they still use them some. But interestingly, mercury can pass in utero, like in the placenta, where you can accumulate it before you're even born. And after I went through a significant mercury elimination, I felt a lot better. And I feel like a lot of that was actually contributing to the inability to focus, the depression that would come in spurts that could be really intense. So that was very fascinating to me. And we did it by balancing my minerals, not by pushing the mercury out by force, like chelation or by having metal detox, because those can be pretty harsh. So it was a longer journey, but I noticed significantly, like I remember the test where we really saw it like going high as it was coming out. And then how I immediately felt a lot better after that. And I continue, doing those tests myself and doing that program as maintenance. And I still am like, at times I will dump a little bit of mercury. So we know that there was a lot of that in my body. And then other one was copper, which I don't really know where that came from, although we grew up in a really old farmhouse and I'm pretty sure it had copper water pipes and the water could have been acidic. I don't know. I remember we got sick from the water when we moved there. So my parents put like filtration systems in, but like the shower water wouldn't have been filtered and things like that. So I don't know if I accumulated it there. Because since I've actually worked with some of my sisters and very fascinating, but their tests were almost identical to mine with what metals they were carrying, even though geographically for years now, we don't even live in the same state. So I feel like it must have been like accumulated like early on in childhood
Yeah.
or
Huh. Interesting.
yeah.
So yeah, in my mind, I'm thinking that you would have grown up in a pretty natural way with not a lot of outside, influences, but rather it seems like there were some pretty high levels of copper and mercury. You said you were diagnosed pretty early on with a focus issue.
Yeah.
Wow. So now, that you've seen a decrease in those symptoms, where are you now in your process for, the focus and just being able to manage all of that in your day to day?
Yeah, so it's a lot better. That's not saying I don't still struggle with focus, especially when life gets really hectic, which I think is partially normal when you're going a million different directions. But I can manage it a lot better than I used to. Like in school, like my grades really suffered and my teacher would like talk to my parents and she'd say, I know that she can do it. It's just like she can't stay on the topic long enough to even like, I don't know what to do for her because there's all these other kids in class. And I can't spend time, just talking her through everything. So that was like, it actually like would affect, self-esteem, kind of because you realize that you're like behind with the work. It's not, but yeah, the grades definitely suffered. To where I am today, I would say, sure, there's days where I still have to like be intentional about like taking extra time to do breath work before certain projects and things. But I don't have that inability to just like, if I decide to, I actually can. But the bigger one that actually I would say really changed for me was depression. Like I remember being young and feeling like life is pretty great in general and not knowing that like that's not just what life looks like to people. As I got older and when I started working on things, I started feeling genuinely like excited about certain things or, like life looked a lot brighter and realizing that that's pretty abnormal. Like it should not be the normal for us to just kind of view things as really blah, I guess is the best way I can. So that's probably actually the one that I would have noticed the largest improvement with getting rid of the mercury and the copper. And there was other metals too. Those were just really high for me specifically.
What do you think would be maybe some things to look for if someone in your life or your family need to detox?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, with a lot of kids, half of my practice is children and teenagers. The other half is their moms or their parents because they end up realizing a lot of the toxicities that get passed on were actually before they were even born. And it's unfortunate. It's just our world has a lot of these things in it and we accumulated over a lifetime. So some of the most common symptoms I see would be really young children. It starts out as picky eating. Interestingly enough, specific mineral deficiencies will impact your body's ability to digest certain foods. So actually will change your appetite towards like typically I'll see them craving sweets and carbohydrates, but having very low appetite for meat or protein, even eggs. Sometimes they'll get to the point where they'll like not even be able to eat it just because their appetite for it is so low. So when they're really young, those are some symptoms. Like under 2 years old, sometimes an inability to sleep, like just keeping parents up a lot and not the brain, it's not able to shut down. is a really common one. As kids get older, we'll sometimes see more like behavioral issues like compulsive behavior, or the same as me, inability to focus in class or in general. Sometimes doing things really quickly without thinking would be another one. And then the hyperactivity, like just feeling like the brain doesn't want to shut down even when it's time for the body to be calm, just not being able to do that. So there's kind of like a generic variety of symptoms, but I would say the toxicities don't. For example, if I look at two tests, I actually had this happen with identical twins. Their test looks almost the same, but they might be presenting the symptoms in a different way. So one is experiencing more like digestive issues, and the other is experiencing more behavioral issues. When I talked with the mom, she was like, I know that there's something going on with both of them, but it's presenting so differently. I don't know where to even start. So we did the test, and sure enough, like it was mostly where the body is holding on to the toxins was different for each one. So it's not always the same, but those are kind of a variety of symptoms. And then in teenagers, especially as they get older, sometimes depression and anxiety can be really heightened, especially when we're seeing more mercury. Aluminum can kind of cause that too. It causes the brain to feel a little bit more dull or brain fog. And then copper, especially girls after they kind of hit puberty, that can be really problematic because copper will affect the menstrual cycle. So you might notice like more difficult PMS and things like that in older girls.
So lots of different metals could affect children in different ways.
Yeah.
Overexposure, I guess, is what I would.
And
Okay.
a lot of it isn't that like a child just like came into contact with like lead paint and it was this drastic exposure most of the time. I mean, that can happen, but what I see a lot more is, so I've had the chance to work with like a 1-year-old, her mom, and then her grandma. So the way our body gets minerals and metals is through mom. Obviously, we get dad's genetics and things like that, but in utero, it's mom that passes her minerals and metals to baby. So we can actually trace it back to generations sometimes. But the specific 1-year-old I was talking about had extremely high levels of aluminum. It was one of the highest levels I'd ever seen in my practice. And kind of what had brought her there was colic and just crying for the first year of her life. They couldn't get a lot of rest. So when we saw the levels, she started getting better quickly. And so mom tested, and then grandma was like, I'm going to test myself too. And we could see on all of their tests that the imbalance had started way back already. So it's hard to know always like at what point did it become, unbearable for the body. But typically the way that metals and minerals work is if the body has enough minerals when a woman is pregnant, it will pass everything that's good that it can first pass. But when we're deficient and the body can no longer afford to give that, it passes what's next best, which is the metals, because they actually have a very similar structure to the minerals, but they do a way like a lesser job than the minerals do. So to an extent, they actually keep us alive, but not in a very, they don't work in a very productive way long term. So a lot of what I work with, I would say it's more like generational toxicities and deficiencies versus a drastic exposure that happens like randomly. Now, there are cases when I'll see that for different reasons. Like sometimes there's gene mutations where people can't detox very well. So if we get into things like after a child's been vaccinated, sometimes we'll see that their body could not handle it well. And there's like issues with that, which I know that not saying either way to do or don't, we'll just see that sometimes. But for the most part, I would say it's generational what I see happening in their bodies.
And have you seen any kind of trend where if a family, like similar to your situation where you all grew up in a similar area and same house possibly, sounds like do you see like a difference in like if a family has been in the same house for multiple generations versus they've lived all over the country in different phases? Like, do you ever see a trend with that?
Yes, I love that question because I actually see it quite a bit. So geographically, some areas are going to have higher levels of specific minerals. Minerals come through the water and the food that we eat and drink. And so some areas naturally have more contaminants of certain metals where others have higher certain minerals. Drinking the same kind of water as a family will 100% impact, your levels. Specifically where we grew up, that area is known to have large levels of manganese in the drinking water. we had no idea until I started testing some of my family members, and we all had it high. And we're like, and then we tested like some of my aunts and uncles that live in the same area, and then tested the drinking water, and it was really high. So the level was, so that one tends to be higher in that area, but there's other areas like my husband's from North Idaho. That wasn't really a problem there for his families. Yeah, it's just there definitely can be correlations. Like areas of lots of farming, sometimes we'll see more cadmium or even lead, depending on what was used for the fertilizers and things like that, because then food grows or it leaches into the well waters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because some people may think, well, I have a well and it goes through a certain filtration process, through all the different layers of soil and rock. And then they think it's okay and fine, and maybe not think about having a filter on their water system. So that's interesting. And it makes sense. If you live in the same area, you should have a similar, I guess, deficiency or over toxicity of whatever's in the water. That makes sense. Okay. So as you have worked through these types of testing, are there specific tests that are better than others? Have you found there to be a certain, diagnostic, I guess, approach that you would offer or suggest?
Yeah, so I do a lot of the hair tissue mineral analysis. I also do blood work, but if I'm working with the symptoms that we're talking about today or really young people, I like the hair tissue mineral analysis for a couple different reasons. One, it's super easy to do. It's very affordable in comparison to blood work, and it's very accurate. The difference kind of between like doing a blood test and the hair tissue mineral analysis, it's very hard to get the picture of a metal in the blood work for one reason. Our blood is very important. It has to keep homeostasis as much as possible because it's keeping us alive every second of the day. So what the body will do is when there's larger amounts of metals, it typically tends to store them outside of the blood in areas like organs, sometimes even bone and teeth. It tries to keep our body as safe as possible because our bodies are smart that way. So what the hair tissue mineral analysis test is, hair is actually a place where metals get pushed into quite a bit. It's an area that does not cause any damage for them to be there. But if we're seeing it in the hair, we for sure know that it's in other areas as well. And the hair test gives us a snapshot of about the past 3 months, like what has been happening the past 3 months in the body, versus blood work is like a snapshot in time. It can change from day to day depending on stress levels and things like that. So I find a hair test to be a lot more accurate to test like for heavy metal toxicities. But every single time that we're working with a toxicity, we first have to look at the deficiencies that are happening, because if we just force the metals to come out, but we don't give anything good to replace that spot, it can actually, I've seen people get worse doing that, because essentially we're just taking everything away but not replacing it with something good. So typically the way that we like to work with the test is we look at their deficiencies first and the balance between the minerals. So it's not quite as simple as just looking at the test and being like, sodium and potassium are low, so we're just going to take a bunch of salt. But rather, the adrenals are down regulated. So that's why they're low. So we'll try to help the adrenals gain energy. Things like B vitamins and specific minerals do help raise the sodium and potassium, like zinc, sometimes copper, depends on the balance. And then as those systems get stronger and the minerals increase, the body itself will start actually pushing those metals out. And so it's a much more gentle approach. And we're allowing the body to decide when it has enough energy for that process to happen, rather than forcing with like a heavy metal cleanse or chelation or something like that.
Knowing that you have certain tests that you like to use and why, and you've explained that based on, the different types of toxicity that somebody could be dealing with. So then what? So once you've done the testing, you've pinpointed the deficiencies, it sounds like you start to kind of put together a plan of action. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the plan of action is actually pretty simple. So it's very bio-individual. So one person's will look very different from the next. But typically we look at the imbalances. We look, are the adrenals downregulated? Is the thyroid downregulated, or the immune system? Like, what is needing the most support? And we start focusing on the four main minerals first and balancing those. If we can get those pretty balanced and in good levels, the rest of them actually really will follow pretty closely behind that. And so we start foundationally, like with the first four, getting those balanced based off of what your test is showing. And then sometimes depending on symptoms, like I like to take the person as a whole, like if your symptoms are, there's a lot of, focus going on, sometimes we'll bring in some Band-Aids like herbal things or, working with someone that helps manage things like ADHD, like practical steps and tips. That's something I did for myself until the body is able to get some of those levels better. And then typically I'll put everything together in an email and send it over. And then we do like a call where we go over everything together. And typically once you start, you want to make sure that you're retesting about every 3 months because we want to be able to track those metals as they're being pushed out. And as that happens, the metabolic rate shifts. Sometimes people have a slow metabolism and actually shift to fast, which completely changes the nutrients that the body is needing to maintain that. So we want to keep up to date. I would say probably the hardest part for most people is making sure that they're doing the retest every 3 months, but that really is crucial to make sure that the doses stay at a place that your body is needing and that you're getting the best results possible.
Sounds like it's not just a one and done. You need to first figure out what the issue is and then follow that care plan that's suggested and then retest every 3 months. What does that look like, I guess, for a year out, 2 years out, 5 years out? Do you see people like clients continuing process for multiple tries, like, I guess multiple retakes, retests, or do you see that, once they've done it a few times, maybe 3 times, they feel pretty good and they can manage the process from there on their own?
Yeah. So there's a couple, it depends on a person's goals. Like so one of my brothers, for example, his levels were mostly good when I tested him. The only reason that he tested was because he was just curious and he wasn't sick. And because he was like, test me, let me see what's going on. So we did. And of course, there's always some imbalances. It's rare that we get a perfect test. Like I've never seen that. But from all the tests I've done, his were phenomenally good. And he is, one of those people who just doesn't stress that much about life. Like he's more go with the flow. But I don't know, does that impact it? But for him, like he'll test maybe twice a year and he stays on kind of 4 to 5 different supplements that he just uses as a maintenance, mostly because he does have a pretty intense job where he doesn't always get to eat good food like we need to. And sometimes he, is in places where he's like, I feel a little bit more tired. I need extra energy. So that would be like a maintenance plan. That's not the average population that I work with. Most people that come to me are like, I really need energy, or what can I do for this? And so once the body has gotten to that place, it can take, up to 24 months to get those levels in a good place and see enough of the metals moving out so that we can actually start maintaining. Now, in a perfect world, we would be getting a lot of those minerals through spring water, homegrown foods and things like that. But that's not really the world we live in anymore, unfortunately. So I would say most people can benefit from, once they get through the first 24 months, going to a maintenance plan where they test less often, but they stay on some key things that they might have had low since the beginning or as things shift. And there's a couple exceptions. Women in their childbearing years, it can really make a difference for what they're passing on to baby. So in those cases, I would probably suggest just the full protocol while in childbearing years, as long as you're going to be having children. And if you address it in a young person, a child versus an adult, it also really can make a difference. Children get rid of the metals much, much faster. Their bodies just way versus adults, we have more stress, more baggage already. The metals have accumulated a little bit more. Our deficiencies are a little bit higher. And so I would say in children, sometimes it doesn't take that long. Adults almost always take 2 to 3 years to get to a point of maintenance. And then sometimes you have to take other things into consideration. I've worked with people who've had eating disorders. I had an eating disorder at one point. So that really put a hit on my zinc levels. Like my zinc levels are really tanked out. And like my sodium was really high. Some of those things can really impact like inflammation and things. So to this day, I'm still working on those. It's much better than it had been, but it's something that I expect to maintain over the next couple years, because I also don't get enough of that through the food like I should be. But sorry, I kind of got carried away. I don't know, does that make sense or not?
Yeah, it does. I mean, if you're going through any phase in your life where you're not eating well,
Yes.
or just not taking care of your body, that would make sense that you would come, to the point where you need something additional or you need a change. And so
Yes.
that makes sense. Or if you're, experiencing some sort of crisis, it sounds like most of your clients are coming to you when they're not feeling well. But I think
Right.
it makes sense too for listeners and viewers out there to consider getting tested when you feel well, so then you know what your levels are like when you're feeling good, if possible, because then you can, as you go through life, you can kind of maintain or supplement
Exactly.
as needed.
Exactly, for sure. And, there's a few things that would be great if we would still be getting through our food, but with conventional farming, that has really changed. Like the ground was more depleted, so the ground doesn't have it to put it into the food. And that's just kind of the world we live in. It's not that we're going to be stressing about something that's outside of our control. But there is a few things that I see almost every single person being deficient in, no matter how well they eat. And so for me, I would rather help my body get that through an easy supplement when I see that it's low versus waiting until it's impacting symptoms or passing it on to my kids kind of thing. Because once we pass it on, the deficiency tends to be impacting the next generation even more because they have less to start out with than we did. But yeah, zinc is a really big one that I see being low in a lot of people. And that's not telling anyone to just go grab zinc and start taking it, because if you have a low sodium, it can lower the sodium even more, causing fatigue and symptoms of adrenal burnout kind of. So we don't want to do it without knowing what the levels are. But a lot of kids that I work with have really low levels, and that can impact hyperactivity in the brain. It impacts our ability to have good immune function. And it's a really big one for our body to be able to make the enzymes that digest protein. So a lot of these children, I will often see them, not wanting to eat protein foods and really gravitating towards carbohydrates and sweets. And even we'll sometimes see more they'll be really picky about textures and things. And it's kind of the symptoms of zinc deficiency when the zinc deficiency is really low. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that I've run in a lot. But again, the people I work with, usually things have been happening for a long time before they come and get tested. It's not like it's usually done preventatively, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're already kind of working on a few theories of, is stress something that affects the levels that you're seeing, or is it generational? Is it something that, a certain group of kids are experiencing now more than ever? It's just
Right,
interesting to hear the different patterns that you're picking up on right now with these
right.
tests.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any other ideas that might be helpful for families, parents that are seeing, some behavior changes in their child or any family member that they're noticing that there might be a deficiency? Besides getting tested, working with you, what might be some other strategies they might consider?
Sure. I mean, for myself, I'm a person that struggled with focus a lot. My parents, really did work on helping practical ways, like getting my grades up without ever knowing that testing was available to help with the nutritional things. So one of the things that we did was just keeping lots of pens and easy things that I would tend to lose all the time, rather than making it a big deal and just lost something again. We just keep a lot of those things that are very affordable in large amounts, and we just kind of compensate for it that way. So there's not this constant stressor where these little things are we're going out the door, but we don't have this, or because lost it again. So some practical things, which we actually worked with a therapist that helped us with that. So I would say if they are struggling with focus or ADHD symptoms, getting help for that, it can't be really important, especially when you're in school and it's impacting grades and your level of kind of your self-esteem is being impacted. It can be really helpful to have somebody that is, you know, geared towards that and specializes in helping with it. But for me, I know it really helped to not just have to sit somewhere for a really long time focusing on a subject that was super boring. So my mom would get creative and set a timer and you have this certain amount of time where you focus, but then the rest of it, then you get to go outside and play for a good 30 minutes and like breaking it up. But again, a lot of that came because, my therapist was also, helping my mom know how to cope with it. So it would kind of go back to the same answer, I guess, of getting professional help if that's something that you are dealing with. But even though, those are some of the things I worked with to help myself, and I still use some of those to this day. There's nothing that kind of replaced like getting some of the metals out that actually were impacting my brain's ability to regulate some of those things. But it did definitely help with those like meltdowns before going out the door and you just can't find this thing because you lost it again. And mom was just like, oh, here, we have an extra. Let's go with it. So those are some things that made life a little bit easier at that time.
I guess my brain's just kind of wondering, like, I'm thinking it could be an overexposure to minerals or metals. It could be a deficiency in minerals and or metals that one might be dealing with. And also you've shared that there's never going to be a time in our life where we're going to be perfect all the time, right? We're always going to have like too much or too little of something. But it's just the combination of, whatever that looks like for us that's either going to help us or cause us to make a change of some sort in our lifestyle or our diet or our activities. So you've already offered a few options for listeners and viewers to consider as they think through maybe any kind of changes that they've been observing, or just the way they're feeling or the way somebody in their family might be feeling right now that might be causing some focus issues, behavior issues. It might even be depression, any kind of mental health or physical health that might be going on. And I'm not a medical provider, so I'm just asking questions and trying to find out more. And, as a certified health coach and practitioner, you're offering ideas for listeners and viewers to consider. And I think it's just the beginning of maybe a conversation that one might want to have with a family member at home. But if they wanted to, if anybody out there wanted to learn more about you or maybe consider taking the next step of getting these tests done, how can they find you?
Sure. So I'm not on social media that much because a lot of my practice grew by word of mouth, but people can always reach me by my email. So my email is laurewestlife93@gmail.com. And you can always reach out to me that way. I do have a website and you can find some information there where you might even be able to look up like symptoms that could be caused by certain deficiencies or toxicities and other videos that are on the website.
Yeah. And there might be a few out there that are just wondering, like, is this something that I need to look into further? Would you say that there are any kind of studies, research out there that people can look up or learn more about before they decide if they want to make that next step? Would you suggest?
Sure. So there is a website. It's actually the lab that I work with directly, ARL Labs. If you go on their website, they have a part that's called newsletters, and they also have a part where it goes a little bit more into depth of like symptoms that the actual metals can cause, and then also things like what zinc does in our body and which functions zinc is needed for. So if you have areas that might not be doing well with that, could be a sign that zinc is out of balance with something. Doesn't mean that we need to go take a lot of zinc, but it could be something that's impacting it. But you can kind of look at all of the minerals and the metals on their website and just gather some information there. And that tends to be a really helpful place to just, learn some more about it. And then the work of Dr. Paul Eck, he has some literature that he's had worked on before he had passed away that is also really great. It's a little bit more scientific. So if you're looking for like learning quickly, it might not be the best option. Like the website is really valuable.
Okay. The more people know, the more that they're going to want to learn how to work with you and figure out what's going on. If there's, questions that can't be answered by any of the medical providers that they've reached out to so far.
Sure. Yeah.
And being in an educational space for over 25 years, I can think of all the strategies that you suggested are things that we would do in the education setting, have fidgets on hand by the loads, have extra pencils and pens. And I can think of all the teachers that would say, just we have to have pencils all the time. And it's just easier when you're not fighting all the battles at one time
Yeah.
in a classroom, and so if parents out there are wondering, like, how can I make homework time a little bit easier? How can I make the transition from, coming home from school to home a little easier? And then, just all the things.
Absolutely.
It's helpful to think about those strategies. But if you've done all those things and you're still experiencing challenges with your kids' eating habits or homework habits or grades aren't improving, then you might want to consider looking at next steps.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So anything else that you wanted to make sure that we share with the listeners before I let you go?
I can't think of anything. It's been really lovely chatting with you, Kendra.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we've covered a lot of ground, and I think it's amazing that you are doing this work. I think that's great because, you always kind of wonder as a mom, as a parent, am I doing everything I can for my child? And there's probably a million things that we could be doing, but if you can focus in on a couple things and then just make sure that you're following through on those and seeing if they're working or not working, it's a good way to kind of track progress. And so it's one more, something to think about as far as minerals and metals and what's in our drinking water and our foods.
Right, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you again for agreeing to sit down and talk about all these findings that you're working with. Sounds like you've got quite a few clients. You're busy.
Yeah, which I'm grateful for. I really enjoy what I do. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Amazing. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you. Same to you.
Well, that's it for today's show of the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Diane Yoder as much as I did. Her perspective on mineral balancing, brain health, and detoxification really opens the door to understanding how personalizing nutrition can transform the way that we feel and function every day. If you found value in this episode, I would love for you to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Go Slow to Go Fast Lifestyle Podcast. And consider telling a friend or two that might be going on a nutrition journey of their own right now. As always, thank you for tuning in and being part of this community. Until next time, keep finding ways to go slow to go fast, and let's continue focusing on what matters most. And remember, the light in me honors the light in you. And as you head into the rest of your week, let your light shine through. Thanks for listening.